Welcome, everyone. I'm Sue Barber, author, former IT director for a Fortune 500 company, turned executive coach, and this is the Visibility Factor podcast, where we explore how to raise your visibility and play bigger at work and in life. We'll explore key topics and welcome guests that help you shift your thinking about yourself so you can see new possibilities for your leadership. I'm on a mission to create a visibility movement for leaders to show their value and be seen for their true talent. Are you ready to take the next step towards a higher level of visibility for yourself? Let's go. The Visibility Factor is brought to you in part by the Choose Your Life Challenge. Do you feel like it's too late to do something new? You have a good life and your basic needs are met. You have a place to live, a job that provides enough, and friends and family to share it with. But it's all passing by so quickly, and it feels like you're running out of time to do the things you wanted to do. Join Danielle McCombs and Christy Allinger, co-hosts of the Opposite of Small Talk podcast, in a 30-day interactive experience that helps you to live a more intentional life. Through a combination of live sessions, video coaching, and digital social interaction, you will be guided through a series of ideas to explore your mindset and gain confidence to live the life you want. Sign up today by visiting theoppositeofsmalltalk.com/challenge. Use promo code CHALLENGE4 for a 20% discount. That's theoppositeofsmalltalk.com/challenge and promo code CHALLENGE4. Welcome back to the Visibility Factor. This is Sue Barber, your host. I am so excited today to bring Mark Kenny to my show. Mark comes from a very similar background to my own, and I think he's going to have some amazing things to share about working with organizations and teams. So welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you, Susan. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Well, I will let you introduce yourself and share with the audience what you're about and your background, and then we'll get started with our conversation.
Okay. Well, you already know my name, Mark Kenny. So right now I work with executive and leadership teams who need to embrace change together so that their organizations thrive and change and disruption. So I do a lot of work with leadership teams and some other stuff on the side, like leadership workshops, but that's primarily what I do now. And my background is actually in IT. So I started off in IT, and after doing that for a while, started my own software company. And just a small little company, but went into a lot of different organizations, saw a lot of the same sort of problems that leaders were trying to solve with software, but weren't really going to be solved with software. And that started me on a journey to where I am now, to try and get organizations healthy and teams working together and organizations heading in the same direction.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah. So you and me being both from an IT background, we definitely have a lot in common. So Mark, in organizations, are you seeing any things from the pandemic that are causing some issues with teams and how they're working together?
Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that there are a lot of teams that are feeling disconnected or isolated, or just feel like they're not really going in the same direction, or they're tired, or they've been overworked, or they don't really feel like a team. There's a lot of that I'm experiencing. I don't know if you're hearing the same thing. So yes, in that sense, but no, in the sense that I don't know that that's really pandemic induced. The pandemic exacerbated what we weren't doing before. So if we weren't building in the team before, then that just got exposed in the pandemic. If we weren't really investing in developing the team and becoming a cohesive team and aligning around goals, then the pandemic and remote work just exacerbated it because we had to work even harder in the pandemic. So that's why I say yes and no. Can I do that?
And I agree with you. I'm curious, do you think that it's in any way related because a lot of companies are still promoting kind of more of even a hybrid role, like you can be hybrid or you can be fully remote? Do you feel like that is part of the challenge too? Maybe leaders don't know how to lead a remote workforce?
I do think that's part of the challenge. I think that's part of the challenge, yes, depending on how they look at it. So I mean, if this is really a team, if it's really a team, like we depend on each other, and we have to do work together in order to accomplish something, then we can't just be kind of some people hybrid and virtual and never have time together with the team. That's just not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But not all teams are teams, if I could say that. Some are work groups, and some jobs you can do on your own. And we don't have to do it as a team. We just have to get the work done. And I think in that case, it's okay, but maybe creating that clarity around what type of work are we doing, and do we really need to be a team? For example, if it's a leadership team, boy, we've got to spend some time together, because the whole rest of the organization depends on us being aligned and working together. Whereas somebody else, maybe we're off, I don't know, I don't want to make up something, but we're off doing something where I don't really need to engage other people. I can just do my work and move on. Then maybe that's a little different.
What do you do with a team who is maybe a senior team who isn't trusting each other, who isn't working well together? What are some of the things that you do first to assess that? And then also, what do you do to help them move past that situation?
Oh, good question. Well, first of all, it's just talking to the leader and seeing what's going on, and maybe a couple team members. Because it's going to take certain things for that team to develop that trust, and that really starts with the leader. So, for example, if the leader isn't willing to be a little vulnerable, if the leader isn't willing to put themselves out there and do some of that work, or if the leader doesn't look at it as their job, then there's really not a whole lot that I'm going to be able to do. So it always starts with the leader. And then as far as trust goes, I use various assessments. For example, I'll use some Patrick Lencioni assessments and his 5 behaviors assessment. One of those is on trust. I love using that with teams, because what you get out isn't me saying anything, it's them saying it for themselves, like specific behaviors and how things come out in meetings. And so then it's pretty clear. It's in black and white, or actually it's in red, yellow, green. And and you just can't escape it, right? It's this is what they've said. So I do use that a lot, because then we can have a substantive conversation about what the situation is and what needs to be done. And I think the second part of your question was, how do I lead them through that? So it's a process. A lot of times we'll go through a strategic retreat to initiate that process or to start the conversation about it. But oftentimes it's going through, you know what, Susan, I'm going to back up. There's a process to it, and then there's a simple answer to that. The simple answer is me coming in and invoking conversation about it. Like, what kind of team do we want to be? What do we need to do different to get there? What kind of trust do we have? It really is just having some of those sometimes uncomfortable conversations. And my job is to facilitate the process and get that conversation going. And so some of the ways I do that is, what does it mean to be a team player? What does it mean to show up to be a good teammate? How are we doing that? And then and then going back to that assessment, just sharing, hey, here are the behaviors that we said we're not very good at as far as trust goes. We don't say, I'm sorry. We don't ask for help. We don't offer ideas. We're more concerned about what other people think are going to respond. How do we show up differently? How should we behave differently in meetings? And then, I feel like this is a long answer, Susan, but then sometimes it depends on where a team's at. There's some very simple trust activities to do just to get to know each other a little better, like a little bit about their histories and, why they joined the team in the first place, or even who their favorite sports team is, or, anything to start to share with each other can start to build some of that trust with each other.
I did a couple of those different types of things like you're mentioning there. One was I asked a bunch of questions, and one of the questions was, what is your biggest fear? And it was really fascinating, because I think that was the part where they were the most vulnerable and shared like what was really happening. So I was really proud of them I know that's not easy to answer. And they were willing to go there. And I think it helped the conversation just move in a much better direction. And then the second thing we did was talk about artificial harmony. And I think that's one of the things that to me was most interesting just learning how to help people start to see that that's even a thing, right? That you're all being so nice, and then you're leaving the room, and then you're all having silent conversations after with individuals. That makes it very difficult to trust, right?
It does. It absolutely does. And that happens a lot, where we don't know what's going on, or we're having side conversations, or it seems all fine, but really everyone's frustrated.
Right. On the surface, it seems wonderful. And then the conversations are happening elsewhere. What are some things that you've done to help people come back to the room, if you will, right? Come back to the room and have those types of conversations versus doing back channels or trying to have them outside of the room?
Well, I think that's where the value of something like a retreat really comes into play, where you have some dedicated time where we're not leaving. We're staying, and even setting some rules of engagement ahead of time is helpful. We've got to work on the team. And so, we're spending this day to have these conversations, and I don't want to say there's no escape from it, but there's no escape from it. Like we need to have some of those conversations. But I think it's a gradual process. Like we're not starting with some of the deeper questions and what's going on in the team. It may be, depending on where the team's at, ramping up to it. But at some point, it's poking at the conversation and just asking, like, what do people need from each other out of this team, and what do we need to be a better team, and to have those types of conversations. And inevitably, here's what I found is inevitably they start to come out from enough people, and there's almost a feeling of it can be uncomfortable, but there's almost a feeling of, okay, I'm glad we're doing something, because I was about to leave, or this is just silly. I don't like working here. It doesn't even feel like we're a team. So I'm glad, even though it's uncomfortable, it feels like we're moving forward finally. So in that case, I don't think it's that hard to get them to come back if it feels like we're making progress.
Mm-hmm. So when you mentioned earlier about the leader doesn't even feel like it's their job to kind of bring a team together, tell me some situations that you've seen like that, and what did you do to help that leader maybe come to a different conclusion?
Well, I would say, Susan, I can't get them to come to a different conclusion. They got to do it on their own, but I can at least expose it, because a lot of times they don't have anyone that's saying to them, I don't think your motive is right here. Like, I don't think you see this as your responsibility. It's not HR's job to develop cohesion. That's your job. So I can expose that and just tell them what I'm seeing. A tool that I've used quite a bit recently is Patrick Lencioni has this book, and I apologize if I use his name a lot. I've studied a lot of his stuff, and it just works, among with some other stuff. But he has this book called The Motive, which deals with how leaders are either reward-centered or responsibility-centered, and that has provided a good model for getting people to see that. And I have a little assessment that kind of takes that, so they can assess themselves or have their team assess them. And it's things like, how's the leader doing at developing the team? So it's some things like that, some very clear things where they can get a sense for if they're leading from the right motive. So those are ways to really get at what's really going on here. Do they really care about it? Are we just going through the motions to just tick off the fact that we had a retreat? Or do I really see this as a responsibility? Are they really going to show up as vulnerable? Are they really going to invest the time it takes to build into the team, and we can have those types of conversations? I feel like that was a really long answer, Susan. Tell me I answered your question.
No, it's perfect. No, I think it is the way it works, right? Because I think, you're a coach, I'm a coach. There's always conversations that need to happen. And sometimes those take longer than others. And, sometimes it's just time. I think sometimes people need to go through the experiences a few times and start to have those tough conversations before they can see that maybe they could do something different as the leader. I think sometimes it's very easy to say, well, it's my team's fault, right? Things aren't well, or things aren't working well because of what they did, versus looking internally and trusting yourself that you have the right answers and that you can lead this team. I think there's sometimes insecurity, right, that shows up and forces them to look at things in a different way, and they need to see that it's possible for them to lead this team in the best way. And that's some of what you're talking about, is helping them do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of leaders just aren't, like, they feel that, but they're not quite sure how to do it or what the process is.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can be a little refreshing to say, okay, I've got a path to get to that. But I also think it takes, as a leader, I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to feel like, oh, I haven't been doing a good job, and sometimes that can be a real inhibitor to helping the team get better if the leader is really protective of that. As I've been in the past, I mean, it's kind of a natural human reaction and emotion, but the leaders that want to do it really can make some progress.
Yeah, I definitely remember my first leadership experience. I was probably not doing all the right things at that point. So I generally try to explain to them, or use myself as an example, like, I didn't know this at the beginning either, right? There's things you have to learn as you go through these experiences, and everything you learn is going to help you become a stronger leader every time. So it's all a process.
And as well as I do that, a lot of times leaders or managers get into roles and they've never been there before, and no one's told them. So how could they possibly?
Like, they just magically know that stuff.
Right. And I feel dumb because I'm supposed to know all this stuff, but how
have you ever had an experience where you had a team that no matter what you did, no matter how many retreats you had, you could not bring them together?
I haven't had an experience like that, but I have had an experience where I didn't do my homework ahead of time. And so there was I can just feel what this was like sitting in the room, Susan. Like there was a big issue with the team that just blew up in the room. And so that just kind of obliterated our purpose. I have had that happen before. But that was really on me for not doing my homework and really understanding what was going on with the team. And I was like, I'm never doing that again. I'm going to be sure and do my... Right? Well,
do you think that they would have told you?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, because a few things came out as we were getting in the room that gave me a little pause. I'm like, I didn't know that before. Where did that come from? Because someone had asked me to come in and work with this team, and the leader had requested HR for me to. And then HR asked me to come in and work with the team, but I didn't do my diligence with the team and the team leader themselves. This was several years ago. So that's what I thought of when you said that, because like I screw up too, right? I mean, I'm not always doing
Yeah, we all are learning lessons about this.
Yes, it's not easy. It's not easy. That's why a lot of people don't do it. But.
A lot of times I'll see teams that are operating more in silos than in their own, or they don't always think about themselves belonging to a leadership team. They think, well, this is my department. I care about my department. I'm working and focused on them. And, I'm also part of this team, but I don't know that I always think of myself as part of this team. Have you had those types of situations, and how do you handle those?
I think that's the status quo. I think that's in almost every situation. And I think it's natural for people to think of their own departments and think of that as their team. And that takes some time to change that mentality. But one thing I'm thinking of, actually, I had an interview in my own podcast, which I started not too long ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. You inspire me, Susan. And my interviewee, he was with Bridgestone, and like that, one of the answers to your question is we've got to have something, a goal, and he called it a cultural lever. And I was just writing about it this morning. That's why it's fresh in my mind. Like we can't just say let's go change the culture. We need a cultural lever to do that, to change that thinking. And we can't just say, let's break down the silos. It's almost like people need a reason to break down the silos. So what's really helpful and necessary is like this overarching goal or what we're pursuing together that we can only accomplish it together. Like we can't accomplish it in our own department, but we have to work together in order to accomplish it. So that's a helpful tool to rally people around a goal like that and start working together and not just focused on my own department's agendas.
Yeah, I always try to talk about how can you stand for each other's success just as much as your own, right? Everybody cares about their own department, their own people. But at a leadership level, there's also, that's a team as well that you need to be a part of and you need to contribute to and really stand for each other's success. So one problem that one department has can be a problem that everyone can share and support and help if they're willing to. And I think that's sometimes the challenge that people have. Have you seen that?
Yeah, that reminds me of Alan Mullally's story at Ford. Like that's exactly what was happening. Like they were all siloed, but they were all in this room every week, but everything was great, right? But once they're willing to admit that, then somebody, I just remember the story from his book, like somebody else is like, hey, I can help with that. So yeah, I have seen that. It's just so hard to get out of that thinking of, well, they're the administrative person or they're the marketing person. I can't really help with that. So it takes some time to get out of that. But yeah, like I was working with a real estate team earlier this year, and it's like there's real estate people and administrative people. But it's just, but once you start really having this goal as a team, it doesn't matter, right? And then it's like someone that's selling houses can be, oh, I can help with that.
Yeah. Everybody can contribute to the outcome, right, that they're trying to get to. What do you
I mean, that's what it means to be a team, right?
That's what it's supposed to mean, right?
And, I think an important point in what you're saying, Susan, is sometimes it doesn't seem like a big deal to the folks on a team. But, I mean, you and I have worked in organizations as employees, I think both of us. But the people below you trying to get work done across departments, man, they really struggle if we don't have that mentality of helping each other at this
Plus,
level.
I think those team members can feel it, right? If my leadership person that I report to maybe doesn't get along with someone else in another department, well, then you're kind of walking on eggshells, working with their team now. And can I communicate that without causing more drama? I think a lot of that happens in organizations, and it's not always overt, right? Not everybody's always talking about it, but you just know something's going on, but you don't really know what it is. And so you don't really talk about it. And I think it's just frustrating for people. And then the world we're in now, they're overwhelmed already. They have a lot on their plates and they just want to work. They just want to get their work done and not have all the drama.
Yeah. And a little bit related to that is maybe it's not even drama. So yes, I agree with you. And I was doing this leadership workshop a few months ago, and I remember this person was saying, I wish that these people in these other departments could be held accountable. But what he really meant was they have completely different priorities, and this is really important for the organization to get done, but I can't get their help because they're working on other stuff that's important to their boss. And you said the word frustrating, very frustrated.
Yeah, accountability seems to be a big word nowadays too, that I feel like people are saying a lot. Like I either don't know how to hold people accountable, or I feel like I'm trying to hold them accountable, or is there any accountability happening at all? Because it seems like no one's delivering what they're supposed to. So it seems to be like a range of things happening in organizations. Are you seeing some of that same thing too?
Yes. Sometimes I think we start with accountability and want accountability, and there doesn't seem to be any accountability. But I think some of that is leaders not holding people accountable, sure, but also just like what are we holding them to? Is there a standard for team culture? Is there a standard for what we're supposed to be focused on? Is that clear? If there's not that clarity, then it's awfully hard to hold people accountable if people don't know what what the overall goal is and people have committed to that, how can you even talk about accountability until you at least have that as a basis?
Yeah.
And of course, going back to what we said earlier, we need trust to be able to even get to that point. So
yeah, or all head in the same direction, right? If we don't know what the outcome is that we're trying to get to, how do we get there? How do we even begin to get there?
Yes, that's right. You said that so much better than I did, Susan. Yes. If we don't know, if we're all not going in the same direction, how can we hold each other accountable to going in
to get there
that direction?
Yeah, I think that's what's kind of interesting about our role, like facilitating these kinds of conversations, is that we can see everybody's, what they're saying in the room, and then help kind of bring together what that means and play it back for them a little bit, is what I call it. Because I think it's hard when you're in that moment, you can't see it for yourself. And sometimes it does require someone who can just kind of take it all and say, okay, here's what I'm hearing from here. Here's what I'm hearing from you. Let's figure out how to go forward together in a better way.
Yes. And they're so busy, like you said, and overworked that
it's harder.
It's probably even harder now than it used to be.
So what would you say, if you kind of look across all the organizations that you've been working with, what do you think the top 3 issues are in companies right now?
In companies, that is such an interesting question. I mean, there are some problems out there that are the obvious answers, like retention and turnover, for example. I know that's a big problem with a lot of companies. I'm just not sure that's the real problem so much as a symptom of something else. But certainly that is a big problem, turnover and retention. People being overworked, I think, is a big problem. And maybe I'm a little biased, but like teams actually being teams, to me, seems like a huge problem these days. Because we're just not working on it, or we've used the pandemic or remote work as an excuse or whatever. We just it's just like people don't feel like they're pursuing something together, and they feel isolated and disconnected.
Yeah, I think the disconnected word is a good one. I think there's disconnection from, where we're going as a company or what we're doing or what our goals are sometimes. But also just, I don't know, there seems to be a lot of communication challenges always. And I think that comes back to being a team, being open, speaking about what's really going on and not hiding. Not that they're overtly hiding stuff, but I think it's just because they don't want to look bad, or they don't want to share something or be calling someone else out because of that, harmony issue. They're trying to maintain harmony. So I don't know. It's just, there's a lot of challenges, and I think it's incumbent upon having a really strong, great leader to help work through all those things, because there's not one answer for everybody.
That's right. I totally agree with you. I think you're right on. It just takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of work. I mean, it really takes some proactive intentionality to make that happen. Doesn't just happen on its own, especially if you have workers remotely.
Yes, I'm curious, since we're talking about visibility on this podcast, what have some of the things that you've seen with leaders in terms of visibility, what are they doing in companies to either be visible, or do they recognize that it's important?
You sent me some questions. I was thinking about that in visibility, and I think it is like I'm putting myself in the role of like a middle manager or something like that to get visibility, which I think is some of the things that you're talking about, like how do people get visibility, right? I think part of it is like they're accomplishing something. That's one thing that comes to mind. If I could say this, they're doing something embarrassing. And what I mean is, like, if you're putting yourself out there and you're trying to get things done in the organization, inevitably you're going to be embarrassed about something. So it almost takes like being willing to do that because you want to be visible, because you want to contribute to the organization. So that's another thing that comes to mind. And 3 is like intentionally building relationships with top level leaders. I don't know what it is, but it seems like when I do leadership workshops for like middle managers, and I bring up just the subject about like building relationships with senior managers, and how in the world am I going to be visible in the organization if I've got that as a mindset kind of holding me back? So I think folks that are visible are, get past that and almost let go of the outcome, if I will, and just build that network of relationships out there, be known.
Yeah, I love that. The relationship piece. It's so funny that you bring that up. It made me think, so I'm teaching at a company, and it's kind of like new managers or would-be managers in the next year or two. And one of the things that we talk about is influencing conversations and how to have one and what to, think about and how to plan for it. And one of the things that they have to do in order to graduate is to go actually have one. And so when I first said that to them, it's like, okay, in order for you to graduate, you're going to have this conversation, just like you did where you sat back. Everybody was like, what? No, I can't do that.
That's fantastic.
Like, okay, we're going to be here. Yeah. We're going to support you. You're going to be great.
Yeah, I've done similar things, Susan. I've had them some simple as like having a skip level meeting, and I even give them questions to ask. But at least they can go at it like, hey, I've got this homework and I need to.
Right.
At least they're doing it.
You can blame it on us.
Right. At least it gets them going.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah, and it didn't even occur to me. I literally said it without thinking about it too much when I did it the first time with this group. And it came out of my mouth. And when I saw their reaction, I was like, okay, this is going to make them uncomfortable, but it's going to be a good thing in the long run. And they all talked about that as like one of the best things that they did out of that program was how much confidence it gave them to do more of those. And I think, so I guess I trusted my gut on that. I didn't even think about it before I said it, but I think it was the right thing to do.
I love that. Well, how are you can't be comfortable if you're not first uncomfortable. You have to do some uncomfortable things if you're going to be comfortable. So
exactly. Yeah. So I definitely pushed those buttons for them in that moment.
We don't want Susan back. No.
Oh, yeah. That was
you're
so
there
funny.
to make a difference.
Okay.
You're there to push them along. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it built their confidence for sure, and that was the goal, right? It was to help them become stronger leaders.
Right.
So I would love to ask you those questions that I sent you in advance and get your answers on them. So we call this the Rise Up and Be Visible Quick Tips section of the interview.
Okay.
And so the first one is fill in the blank. Visibility is...
Kind of cheated and already answered this a little bit. So what I came up with is creating great and embarrassing outcomes that get noticed.
Ooh, because that's the one thing people would try to avoid is embarrassing outcomes. They don't want to fail. They don't want to make mistakes, but you learn so much from those.
And that's been me. Like when I haven't made an impact, which took really a long time to get over. And I always have to wrestle with that is because I'm not willing to do that. And so I'm not visible because I'm not willing to be a little embarrassed.
I love that. Okay. Do you have advice or a tip that you could share with the listeners on what you have done to be visible?
Serve. Just serve. Like, don't worry. Like in my case, especially what I do now, if there's a need, if there's a client or prospect that needs something, or they're struggling with something, or maybe there is a need out there, maybe another department or for your boss, or your boss can't make this meeting and you can fill in for them, or just serve. I mean, if I don't get business out of it, I'm still just serve. If it doesn't work out the way you want, just serve. Like, how can you just serve people out there when you see a need? That's my advice.
I love it. Because then it comes back, it all comes back around eventually, right? You do good things in the world and you help people. I think it does come back at some point, and may not be right away, but at some point it will come back and help you in some way down the road. So I love that.
Yeah, and I think it also takes some of the pressure off. Like, I'm not going out there because I've got to build this big relationship, or I have to get this deal, or I just go out there and serve and be yourself.
Love it. What is the one piece of leadership or career advice that you've received that's helped you the most?
Stop worrying about the outcome. And I can't remember exactly where I heard that first, but don't worry about what the outcome is, because I know that's held me back. Whether we already talked about being embarrassed or not, or whether I get this deal or not, or whether the project goes well or this meeting goes well, and just do the absolute best I can and don't worry about the outcome. If I fail, I fail, learn from it. Great. Guess what? I'm going to. Fine. Keep going. Try again. Just keep going and not worry so much about and be consumed by the outcome.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it just a few minutes ago, it takes the pressure off, right? You can just show up in the best way and not worry about what's going to happen. And I think in my experience, the situations that I think I would say I failed or didn't do as well as I wanted to are the ones I learned the most from. Simply by just going through that experience, it taught me so many things that I used then. And, now when I'm coaching clients, I can help them start to see what's a little bit different for them about that situation now too.
Yeah, I love that. The flip side of that is I'm trying to avoid those situations. And when I try and avoid those situations, they inevitably happen because I'm more concerned about the outcome than actually doing a good job. And so,
yeah, it's kind of like where you focus. So if you focus on that so much that you may not show up in the best way, I think that's so true. Okay. What books have you read recently that you would love and recommend?
Well, let's see. The Visibility Factor. Oh.
A paid advertisement.
It took me a while to read this one. This is Originals by Adam Grant.
Oh,
I read this recently. And you know what? There's some really good practical things in here for how to make a difference, even when you're not necessarily the top person, if you will. And then I haven't finished this one yet, but I've done a lot of work with this model. Patrick Lencioni just came out with a new one, 6 Types of Working Genius.
Oh, Working Genius. I love his stuff. I mean, I love the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and some of his other ones are just amazing.
This one kind of rounds out like how to become a cohesive team. Like how do we actually do work together? So it's been really, really good for some of the teams I've worked with. So there's a couple for you.
Does that have a bunch of like exercises and things in that book to help teams come together?
It goes over a model, and I haven't read the end of it. So it's a fable, because normally his are fables. So I don't know if it has a lot of exercises, but there's a website associated with it, workinggenius.com, that has an assessment. And it's more about like what kind of work do we love that gives us energy, and how can we use that on the team to get work done as a team. And what I found out is when you do this with a team, and you kind of put a team map on the wall, you can see where the team is getting stuck. For example, you know what? That real estate team I mentioned before, it's like, man, we have so many good ideas and we're to make this business fly, and then they just stop. Well, that's because, and it just became clear, like they have nobody that really enjoys galvanizing people into action and enabling people to actually do it. And it was just like, so anyways, it's been very practical, very, very practical on how to get work done as a team and move away from the silos and departments to not I'm the marketing person or I'm the salesperson, but who can galvanize this team into action? And that's a game changer for people that, at least in my experience, that to get them to think differently.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so true. Yeah. I don't know. I guess I was always that person who was galvanizing everyone together. But so to me, it seems natural. But you're right. I think that is such a big challenge if there's no one playing that role.
Yeah. Or you're the galvanizer, but maybe there's not anyone that is tenacious to get it over the finish line after, or there's 6 different types of genius he goes over. So well,
I will check that out.
It's brilliant.
And I will list those in the show notes so everybody knows about them. Is there anything else you're working on that you would love to share before we end the interview today?
I've got a new podcast called...
Oh, yes. Let's talk about your podcast. What's the name of it?
It's called Becoming Unassailable. So it's like how do organizations thrive despite disruption and change? Because those aren't going away. So I'm just interviewing leaders that have done that. So it's been a lot of fun. Just started. It's just a season at a time. So a season of 10 episodes at a time, and then I'll take a break and do some more later. But that's been a lot of fun so far.
That is awesome. All right. Well, I will put that in the show notes as well so people can check it out. How can people connect with you if they would like to learn more about you and your work?
My website, markkennyspeaks.com. That's Kenny, just one E. I've had to do that my whole entire life. or or on LinkedIn at markskenny.com. I'm sorry, Mark S. Kenny is my profile on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, and I know you do a ton of public speaking as well, and so check Mark out. He is a wonderful human being, and I know that he is doing amazing things helping teams and organizations. So thanks for being on the podcast. I'm so excited to have met you and to really just have spent some time. I think we have a lot in common.
It was fun. Thank you for having me, Susan.
Of course, yes. So thanks everybody for joining today on the Visibility Factor podcast. We'll catch you on the next one. Thanks so much for listening to the Visibility Factor podcast. Remember that visibility starts with small steps that are intentional and consistent each day. Be bold, be visible, be the leader you were meant to be. Find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, which are highlighted in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Visibility Factor podcast.